Hey, welcome. You have arrived at the process. My name is Dr. John Bush. This is lesson 23 in my fantasy football winning your fantasy drafts lesson. We're going to look at the running back position. This is part 1B. We're going to continue our journey. Please go back to the previous lessons and catch up. But we will continue here. Hopefully, going to help you win your draft this year. At least that's the idea. So let's roll here. Uh, in the quarterbacks, I started this aspects looking at failures. Should be an S there. Failures versus success using last year's end of season ranks and compared those players to this year's. And if they did better, they were given a plus number plus the new ranking. And if they did worse, they were given a minus number. And then we can look across a segment of time and see what regions of the running back are the least and most successful from a drafting standpoint from looking at last year's rankings. Some people claim you should ignore last year's rankings. Some people, it's a religion and they follow last year's rankings. And of course, being a scientist, that's not how we approach anything. We usually things are never all or none, even though we like to say that, right? So, you hear people, you always do this or you never do that. That's probably not true. Okay, so let's use this as a touchstone for us to develop some thinking based on what the metrics are actually telling us, not judgments or opinions or wishes. This is the real data, right? And it is what it is. So I looked from 2014 to 2020. I wanted a kind of more of a recent view of the last 7 years. And you see rankings first through the 24th, so RB1s, RB2s. And we look at numbers that are minus or plus. The minus, extreme minus, are in red colorization, and the positives are in blue, so you get a feel for that. And then I judge based on the results between last year and this year, whether it was a failure or success. Obviously, the ultimate would be 7 successes, 0 failures. Worst case would be all failures, 7 and 0 successes. And so, as I said, all or none, if you look, just scan that down, you don't see 7 and 0. Okay, so nothing is always and nothing is never. Okay, so just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. I like the failures and successes. It's a good annotation to look at the data so I don't, get bogged down in, is minus 50 better than minus 40 or what? Failures and successes for what we need to do, I think, is just fine. And I think if you look in the top 5 running backs across those years, we see that the rankings from last year are fairly predictive, somewhere between 4 and 6 successes in using last year's ranks. So when people say, oh, ignore the last year, the data would actually probably play you the other way, that you should start by looking at last year's rankings and then go from there. Notice it's not super successful. In other words, there's no 7s. There were some failures. So there were, 26 The top five, 26 successes, and there were, what is that, 9 failures. Okay, so it's skewed to success, but there were some instances, so it's never always or neither. There it is. Notice the next 6, 7, I don't know, look kind of not as strong. Okay, and then we have 8, 9, and 10, kind of, not as good as 6 and 7s, but you got 5s and 4s there. 11th, that one sticks out as what I call a giraffe. It means it's head above everybody else. That's probably due to random chance. And look, the sample sizes are not great, so I'm not going to be able to do a lot of metrics or stats with this because you just don't have that sampling power. But I think if you look down, for the most part, you're fairly okay to look at the last year's rankings. I mean, you're getting over half successes using those rankings. If you look at success, uh, uh, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. So uh, 5 out of the 24 were below average on success using last year's rankings. So that means 19 were positive and had success. So it looks even better if I remember the quarterbacks, and I didn't look at that. You can go back and look at that, but this looks pretty good here to me. And given a year difference in time, this is not too bad at all. So I think setting up and kind of knowing the running backs based on last year's rankings is certainly worthy of study and sets kind of an initial hierarchy to start moving your rankings based on that. So I think that's what the metrics would tell me. My analysis, they don't actually talk to me, the numbers don't, but they do show you patterns and trends, and that is kind of talking in quotes. So that's how I see the top 24 here. Here's the next 24. And for the most parts, they're still fairly good success. There are certainly blocks. Here's a block that's not very good. Okay, here's an area. It's not very good, but this is a nice block. Here's a 7 and 0. Finally found one. 48th pick. Finally found one. So for the most part, anything above 4 is above average. So there's a lot of, probably not as much in the top 24. Let's see, we had 5 below average. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8. So higher than 5, but not, so great. So you're still probably a good place to start your rankings is last year's rankings. People say throw that out. I'm just telling you what the data is showing. Okay. So notice I didn't say blindly allegiance or non-allegiance. It's just the beginning. We have to establish the metrics for our reference class forecasting. You have to start somewhere. And this is the last year's rankings are showing that they're worthy of using for this year's rankings as far as the beginning process. Obviously there are lots of things that can change situations, right? Drafts, free agencies, new coaches, etc. Strength of schedule changes. Finally, to the next 24, uh, fairly still good. It's holding up. I see a lot of 6s in here. Unfortunately, the amount of points is not so great, but I see a lot of successes, not so much failures. Below 3 and below is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we got 5, 8, and 7. Not too bad out of 72 players. So again, there's nothing to suggest that we should ignore last year's rankings. If you look at some of the positive numbers in this range, some people says, well, can you go up to the top? There's definitely some metrics in here. If you look at the pluses that last year's rankings were completely off, and and that's why we have to start, not finish with last year's rankings. We don't finish with it, we just start with it. And here's the data. This is what it's saying. On average, the failure and successes. So it's a good beginning, but do take hope that there are instances where things are not as we see. Take a look at 69th position. From 19, that player went all the way up towards the top here. This one did as well. So, you do gain some jumps between years. But again, it's a good beginning. Taking a look across, and I think I have my marker. So we look at the successes. Okay, the pattern. So the lowest successes are what, about 7th to what? 7th to what? 41st. Notice we kind of start getting some better deals here. And we have some pretty good deals there. So kind of a barbell. Failures, of course, will come up where obviously it's symmetrical. So where successes are down, the failures are up, right? It's a symmetrical situation. Just taking a look at that. It is interesting. So that means for this year's draft that once you get down past 5th or 6th, all the way down to the 40th, for the most part, there's a higher uncertainty for you, and the chances of picking a failed player seems to be higher than the preceding or the following running back. So looks to me like I'm doing a lot of research in this kind of not a quadrant, but this section of last year. Definitely paying attention here. The metrics is warning you that things are a little bit higher in trick level, I guess, if that's such a concept, a tricky level. You will be bedeviled by the metrics here. It's warning us. So I'm going to listen to that warning. The data is talking to me, and I will use that to make some thoughts and predictions. But it's a beginning, like I say. You still are having some good success, but, and again, this is smooth data. Okay, this is a trend line. I didn't show the actual data points, but I like a smoothing because given the lack of sample sizes, I think that's probably safer to get the trends than to concentrate on all the variance and the noise in the data. This is the variation. Where is the variation? Red and orange are going to be higher variation, and of course we get the highest variation in the top 3, and then a low variation here. Okay, for the most part, pretty good. And then to the back end, even though you have a higher chance of getting some successes, you got a lot of variation. So variation is saying that the results of your selections are going to be more uncertain. And so, just be aware of that. So the overall trend, if you look at the variation, is high early, lower, and then a gradual movement up as you go into the draft. And eventually you go across the early variation here, especially on the back end at the 66th to 72nd running back. So for the most part, once you bottom end at about 15th, 16th, you are adding uncertainty as the draft goes. So you either accept that or you try to be very thoughtful and pick players to beat that uncertainty level you're facing. And here's the actual median of the fantasy points here from average or from last year's rankings. Is what we're doing. And we see that's actually getting smaller towards zero, but we're getting more variation as well. So just be aware, I'm paying more attention to the variance here than necessarily how good or bad our picking was. I'm just worried about picking the wrong one. I think everybody is. And so when you feel like your stress level goes up on the drafts and running backs, that's probably a true statement. So keep that in the back of your mind, that feeling, And so one of the reasons I use slow drafting, people, I hate slow drafts. Folks, you need some time to be thoughtful. Not every pick, but some picks you're going to need to be thoughtful. And it's foolish if you can go into a slow draft that you journey that way. You journey to fast drafts if you're not very good at picking and winning. Why put yourself in a worse shape? So I argue we should do slower drafting. At least that's what works for me. Okay, that's how I make my money. Okay, the next block of material, we're circling back around to age sectors. It's good to be reminded of age, and you remember the overall trends for running backs have seen youth being even more important in recent times, maybe than previous. I don't know. That was kind of, it's been a while since I did that lesson, but that's kind of how I feel. And I think I remember not many old running backs that were making a big impact. So certainly in Dynasty, you really got to keep track of that. Better to. So it's always a debate. Should I get rid of my older dogs, one season later, one season early? I think the common hierarchy or the common, I guess, rule of thumb is you get rid of them 1 year earlier than they might. You try to get a fresher running back. So let's continue. Running back, year, age ranks, 21 to 23, etc., all the way down. Here is kind of the overall averages here of fantasy points per game. That's why these numbers are a little small. So per game, clearly the golden age of running backs here. But, for the last few years, even during COVID, the average Wasn't so bad here. Wasn't so bad. So let's look at youth. This was good. And these were good. The top three. 69th, 6.9 per game. Much higher than any of these. In fact, what is that? The fourth. So we've got the first, third, and fourth are all in recent times of the youth here. As far as the older dogs, 24th to 26th, we had some pretty good shows right here. First and what is that? Fifth. So you're still getting some bang for your buck even at 26th. Notice the drop right here. Okay, notice not so good here. And notice extreme drops here in the old dogs. There was some productive old dogs, but last couple years they have faded away. So to me, 26 below is what I like to look for in running backs. If that's a good tiebreaker for you, then I would definitely use that in your research. Last year's rankings and look at age, maybe combine those metrics, see what you see. That may help some of your picks or find some that you're worried about using just age as a rule to judge them. Excuse me. Here's the trend lines. And let's look at the old dogs. The old dogs, for the most part, they've been lagging the bottom and were severely. It's like if you were invested, if these were stocks, you would have been broke by here. Notice we actually saw a comeback and then a complete drop in the last couple years. So interesting variation here. And so I think for next season, I'm going to avoid the older dogs here for the most part. The green is the opposite. These are the young dogs. And at one point, they weren't putting on a show. But they really dominated in these years, went back under, and now have come back and have dominated in the last 3 or 4 years. So I think I'm moving that way. The blue here are the next age group. And for the most part, they are now shown the last 4 years to come on to their own. And a lot of what's happened is that the 27 to 30, they've seen their better days in 2015, and they've dropped, maybe coming back, but right now still below. So I think, and of course the old dogs are gone, I'm thinking I'm going to stick 26 or below unless, I can find in the 27 to 30, unless I can find something that's really appealing to me here. That's going to be my beginning rule of thumb, not the end. Okay, we're not there yet. This is not the time to be inflexible at all with our journey. Flexibility here. So I went back. That was the previous data of all running backs in my database. Now I said, well, what about the best running back? So I looked at the top quarter, the 75th to 100th percentiles, the top quarter running backs end of season rankings over the same years. What's going on? I do let you look at the averages. Notice over 18 years, the top two segments are the youth right there. Okay, and then the old dogs are bottom. And here's So really take a drop here in the old dogs. So what are we doing? Again, golden age of running backs for the most part, but we haven't done too bad here. And notice some of these dogs, but not so good here last couple years, and really have taken beatings here. So I think I'm sticking with the scenario. Even this 13.4 is great compared all the way back to 2011. So I'm still thinking that we're doing good. And it might be that some of these guys here are now these guys there. Okay. So will some of them survive to this age here in a year or two or three? Will we see? Or will they tail off and are gone? So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind here. So again, I think age has suggested a viable metrics to apply to the running backs, and the top running backs are still showing that trend here. And here we go, the youth in the green, and they're really coming on, and the blue is the next group. And notice these are since about, I don't know, out here this year. Notice the split, drop, drop, rise, rise. So it's like you're peeling back, cutting the deck of cards, and the top half are the younger, the bottom half are the older players. So that's an interesting trend for the most part. And the old dogs have never made it above any of the other sectors uh, in the top group. They just never been able to. They're going to be on the bottom half of the top 25, right? So they're going to be 20th percent and below. You're getting some pretty good, but never at the extremes where the league winners are not going to be found in the 27-year-olds or the 31st, the 30th, 31st old dogs. It's not going to win your league. Your league winners are going to be with the youth, 26 and below. I think that's what the metrics are telling me personally there. And it's interesting to see the 27 to 30 dropping out of this race here. So I'm going to assume that the recent success has skewed this even more in coaches' heads here. If we look across and aggregate the data and look at year sectors, I did the top 25 and then the next 25, the 50th to 74, the rank sectors, year sectors, and the age. So in the best quarterbacks, the best running backs, youth has stood out even better than these guys. And notice the complete drop here. So the story continues here. They used to be more viable, and now certainly these guys are much less viable here. Look at this drop over time. Not so good. The next group looks like that we've seen a rise across all. So it's like what used to be good running backs are now producing at the next level down. So if you're picking some good dogs in the 27th and up, you're probably going to be rewarded somewhat, and you can't ignore the old dogs in that next group. So the fourth round running backs, maybe the third round, age is not as much a factor. Okay, say that again. Age is less a factor, and maybe last year's rankings will be better at putting you on those guys. I think it's pretty neat to see that actually. So the metrics is giving us two different strategies, how we handle the top dogs and then the next slice. Completely different on how we would approach it. Certainly the youth is still the strong, but notice the old dogs uh, are keeping up. So just, don't ignore that at all. And here's just the block. And what I did, this is the youth, the green in front here on the two segments, the 25th top and the next 25th. You can see, of course, the fantasy points average here is dropped. And I put the, in black, I highlighted the block where the top. So notice the top two from the 50th up have been the young players here. And notice the 50th, we see nice picks in these older dogs. They have been viable as well. So keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking at this. Just kind of get a snapshot data. Things have really changed in the last 4 years compared to the previous year. So I think that's the take home of this. So we've ended part 1B, running backs. We've got a whole 2 more sections to go, 2 more lessons. Hope you've enjoyed it. This is the process. My name is Dr. John Bush, and we are having more fun than any people will have in fantasy football prep. Exciting, isn't it? Okay, come back. We're doing this again and continuing and continuing. I got tons of lessons, tons of figures. Oh, yeah. Okay. Take care.